Mars looks close enough to touch. A red world drifting just beyond Earth, familiar in shape, almost comforting in its similarity. For decades, we've imagined cities beneath glass domes, rockets landing in endless waves, children growing up under a pale salmon sky. Mars has become more than a planet. It has become a promise, a backup plan, a second chance. But when we slow down and look carefully, that promise begins to unravel. Mars is not just cold, it is lethally cold. Not just dry, but stripped of stable liquid water. Its atmosphere is not simply thin, it is nearly non-existent, offering no real protection from solar radiation. The surface is bombarded by cosmic rays. The soil contains toxic compounds. The gravity is barely a third of Earth's, and the nearest help is millions of kilometers away. Every breath would have to be manufactured. Every drop of water recycled endlessly. Every structure shielded against radiation. Every human body forced to adapt to an alien environment that was never designed for life like ours. Colonizing Mars is often presented as inevitable. But physics does not care about inevitability. Tonight, we move beyond the optimism and the headlines. We look calmly at the engineering limits, the biological risks, the planetary science, and the brutal environmental reality that defines the red planet. Because when you strip away the dream and examine the facts, the question becomes unavoidable. What if Mars isn't the next Earth, but a world that quietly proves how rare Earth truly is? For centuries, Mars has been described as Earth's twin, not identical, but similar enough to spark imagination. It has seasons, it has polar ice caps, it has a day that lasts just over 24 hours. In photographs, it shows valleys, mountains, ancient riverbeds, and vast plains. From a distance, it feels almost familiar. But familiarity is deceptive. To understand why colonizing Mars may be far more difficult than most narratives suggest, we must begin with its atmosphere, or more accurately, the absence of one. Mars does have an atmosphere, but it is so thin that calling it air feels misleading. The surface pressure on Mars is less than 1% of Earth's. If you stood unprotected on the Martian surface, you would not suffocate slowly. The low pressure would cause the moisture in your body to begin boiling at normal body temperature. Not because Mars is hot, it is usually bitterly cold, but because the atmospheric pressure is so low that liquid water cannot remain stable. On Earth, our atmosphere performs invisible miracles every second. It holds warmth. It allows liquid water to exist. It scatters sunlight. It protects us from meteoroids and radiation. It creates weather systems that redistribute heat across the planet. It is not merely something we breathe. It is the foundation of planetary stability. Mars lost most of that foundation billions of years ago. Early Mars may have had a thicker atmosphere. Geological evidence suggests flowing rivers and possibly lakes in its distant past. But over time, the planet's magnetic field weakened and eventually disappeared. Without a global magnetic shield, the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles from the sun, began stripping away the Martian atmosphere. Molecule by molecule, over immense stretches of time, the protective envelope thinned. Today, what remains is a fragile layer composed mostly of carbon dioxide, far too thin to provide warmth or protection. The average temperature on Mars hovers around -60 degrees Celsius. At night, near the poles, it can plunge below -120. Even near the equator, warmth is temporary and deceptive. Without a thick atmosphere to trap heat, warmth gained during the day escapes quickly into space. Any colony on Mars would need constant heating, not occasionally, constantly. Every structure would have to be insulated, pressurized, and temperature controlled without interruption. A failure in heating systems during a Martian winter could be catastrophic within hours. But temperature is only one part of the problem. Radiation is perhaps the most serious invisible threat. Earth's magnetic field acts as a vast shield, deflecting high-energy particles from the sun and beyond. Mars has no such global defense. Its surface is continuously exposed to cosmic rays and solar radiation at levels significantly higher than those on Earth. Over long durations, such exposure increases the risk of cancer, damages DNA, and may harm the central nervous system. For astronauts visiting Mars briefly, shielding inside spacecraft and habitats may be enough. But colonization implies permanence. It implies children born and raised under a radiation-heavy sky. It implies generations living in an environment that slowly, invisibly damages the human body. Protecting against radiation would require either thick shielding, such as burying habitats beneath meters of Martian soil, or constructing heavily reinforced structures. Both approaches demand immense engineering and energy investment. Then there is gravity. Mars's gravity is roughly 38% of Earth's. That number seems abstract until we consider its long-term implications. On the International Space Station, astronauts in microgravity experience muscle loss, bone density reduction, fluid redistribution, and vision changes, even with daily exercise. Mars is not microgravity, but it is significantly weaker than Earth's gravitational pull. We do not yet know what decades in reduced gravity would do to the human body. Would bones permanently weaken? Would the cardiovascular system adapt in ways that make returning to Earth impossible? Would children who grow up in Martian gravity ever be able to tolerate Earth's heavier pull? Colonization is not just about survival. It is about generational sustainability. And in this domain, we have almost no long-term data. Water is another cornerstone of life. Mars does have water, but mostly as ice, locked in polar caps or buried underground. Extracting it would require energy, infrastructure, and constant maintenance. Liquid water cannot remain stable on the surface under current atmospheric conditions. It would either freeze or boil away. Every drop would need to be carefully managed inside controlled environments. Recycling systems would need to operate near perfectly. A breakdown in water processing could quickly threaten an entire settlement. Food production introduces even more complexity. Martian soil contains perchlorates, toxic chemicals that would need to be removed or neutralized before agriculture could occur. Traditional farming would not work without extensive modification. Most likely, early colonies would rely on hydroponics or closed-loop agricultural systems inside sealed habitats. But these systems depend on energy, spare parts, maintenance, and biological stability. Ecosystems on Earth are incredibly complex, self-balancing networks built over billions of years. Recreating even a simplified version inside a habitat on Mars is a monumental challenge. Energy itself becomes central. Solar panels can function on Mars, but dust storms present a major risk. Mars is known for global dust storms that can last for weeks, reducing sunlight dramatically. During such storms, solar output drops. Any colony dependent solely on solar power would face vulnerability during prolonged dust events. Nuclear power could provide a more stable energy source, but transporting, installing, and maintaining nuclear reactors millions of kilometers from Earth adds another layer of complexity and risk. And then there is distance. At its closest approach, Mars is roughly 56 million kilometers from Earth. At its farthest, more than 400 million. Communication delays range from several minutes to over 20 minutes one way. In practical terms, that means real-time assistance from Earth is impossible. If something breaks on Mars, colonists cannot call for immediate technical guidance. If a medical emergency arises beyond available resources, evacuation is not simple. Launch windows between Earth and Mars occur only every 26 months. Rescue missions would be measured in years, not days. Colonization requires self-sufficiency, and true self-sufficiency in such a hostile environment remains unproven. The psychological dimension is often overlooked. Mars is isolated in a way few humans have ever experienced. Even Antarctica, one of Earth's harshest environments, allows communication and eventual return within months. Mars offers no such comfort. Colonists would know that Earth is not just far. It is functionally unreachable for long stretches of time. Living inside confined habitats, under artificial skies with limited social circles and no natural ecosystems, may take a toll that we do not fully understand. Human beings evolved under blue skies, open horizons, forests, oceans, and diverse stimuli. Mars offers red dust, sealed corridors, and mechanical systems humming in the background. Isolation, confinement, and the awareness of fragility could shape mental health in profound ways. All of these challenges, atmosphere, radiation, gravity, water, food, energy, distance, psychology, converge into a single truth. Mars does not want us there. It is not actively hostile in the sense of intention, but its physical conditions are the result of planetary evolution, not designed for habitation. Every breath would depend on machinery. Every meal would depend on controlled systems. Every day of survival would depend on engineering functioning flawlessly. On Earth, life is supported by planetary-scale systems that require no maintenance. The oceans circulate heat. The atmosphere regulates climate. The magnetic field shields us. The biosphere recycles nutrients. We do not think about these processes because they operate continuously, invisibly. On Mars, nothing operates invisibly. Everything must be built. Everything must be maintained, and everything can fail. This is the beginning of the harsh reality. Not that Mars is impossible to visit, not that humans cannot step onto its surface. We already have the capability to send robots, and we are moving closer to sending people. But visiting is not colonizing. Planting a flag is not building a civilization. Surviving for months is not the same as sustaining life for centuries. Mars may be the most accessible planet beyond Earth, but accessibility does not equal suitability. And suitability is the difference between exploration and habitation. As we continue, we will look even deeper into terraforming, long-term sustainability, planetary transformation, and whether Mars could ever truly become more than a fragile outpost. For now, it is enough to understand this. The red planet is not waiting for us. It is a world shaped by billions of years of atmospheric loss, radiation exposure, and geological change. And if we choose to live there, we will not be adapting Mars to humanity easily. We will be fighting physics every single day. If surviving on Mars requires constant engineering, then thriving on Mars requires something even more ambitious: transformation. For decades, the idea of terraforming Mars has captured imaginations. The concept is simple in theory: thicken the atmosphere, warm the planet, melt the ice, create liquid water, introduce life. Over time, allow Mars to become more Earth-like. But theory and planetary physics are very different things. To terraform Mars, the first requirement would be increasing atmospheric pressure. The current atmosphere is far too thin to support liquid water or human respiration. Even if you could generate oxygen inside habitats, stepping outside without a pressurized suit would remain impossible. Some proposals suggest releasing carbon dioxide trapped in the polar caps and regolith to create a greenhouse effect. If enough CO2 could be liberated, perhaps the atmosphere would thicken and temperatures would rise. However, studies have shown that even if all accessible carbon dioxide on Mars were released, it would likely be insufficient to create Earth-like pressure. The planet simply does not have enough easily available greenhouse gases to transform its climate at the scale required. Mars is smaller than Earth. Its gravity is weaker. Even if we somehow manage to thicken the atmosphere artificially, retaining it over geological timescales would be a challenge. Without a global magnetic field, solar wind would continue stripping away atmospheric particles. In other words, terraforming would not be a one-time project. It would require continuous planetary-scale intervention. Some have proposed generating an artificial magnetic shield, perhaps by placing a large electromagnetic structure at a Mars-Sun Lagrange point to deflect solar wind. While theoretically intriguing, such megastructures would require engineering capabilities far beyond anything humanity has ever constructed. Terraforming is often presented as an engineering problem, but it is also a resource problem, an energy problem, and a time problem. Time may be the most underestimated factor. Even under optimistic scenarios, altering a planet's climate would take centuries, if not millennia. That means no current generation would see the final result. Colonization would depend on long-term political, economic, and technological stability across hundreds of years, something human civilization has rarely maintained without interruption. And all of this assumes Mars can be warmed effectively. But warming Mars is not simply about raising temperature. It is about maintaining equilibrium. Earth's climate is stabilized by oceans, atmospheric circulation, biospheric feedback loops, and geological processes like plate tectonics. Mars lacks plate tectonics. Its internal heat engine is largely dormant. Its geological activity is minimal compared to Earth. Without dynamic internal processes, maintaining long-term climate stability becomes even more difficult. Suppose we succeeded in thickening the atmosphere and raising temperatures enough for liquid water. That water would need to cycle, evaporating, condensing, precipitating, to create a stable hydrological system. Without sufficient atmospheric mass and planetary dynamics, that cycle might remain weak or unstable. And then there is oxygen. Even if Mars were warmed and water were abundant, breathable oxygen would not appear automatically. On Earth, oxygen accumulated over billions of years through photosynthesis. It required microorganisms, sunlight, chemical reactions, and time beyond human comprehension. Reproducing that process artificially would require either large-scale bioengineering or chemical processing on planetary scale. Both options are daunting. Meanwhile, any early colony would still rely on sealed habitats. Terraforming does not solve the immediate survival problem. It does not eliminate radiation overnight. It does not create fertile soil instantly. It does not make gravity stronger, which brings us back to gravity, the one planetary parameter we cannot change. Even in a fully terraformed scenario, Mars's gravity would remain about 38% of Earth's. That fact alone may impose permanent biological limits. Long-term exposure to low gravity could alter human physiology in ways incompatible with Earth. Imagine generations born on Mars adapted to lighter gravity. Would they be able to return to Earth? Would their skeletal structure, cardiovascular systems, and muscle density develop differently? Colonization implies divergence. A Martian population might slowly become physically distinct from Earth's. That raises ethical and social questions far beyond engineering. Are we prepared to create a branch of humanity permanently shaped by another planet? Even before we consider long-term transformation, there is the immediate economic reality. Sending cargo to Mars is expensive. Sending heavy industrial equipment is even more so. Every kilogram matters. Establishing infrastructure requires launch capacity, fuel production, landing systems, construction robotics, and spare parts. Colonization would require continuous resupply for decades, possibly centuries, before true independence could be approached. And independence itself is questionable. A Martian colony would initially depend on Earth for specialized components, medical equipment, electronics, and advanced manufacturing tools. Creating a fully self-sustaining industrial ecosystem on Mars would require mining, refining, fabrication, energy production, and technological expertise, all operating locally. Earth's civilization is supported by a vast global network of supply chains. Rare earth elements mined in one country are processed in another, assembled elsewhere, and distributed worldwide. Recreating that entire industrial web on a single barren planet is not simply difficult. It is unprecedented. Mars offers resources, but accessing them demands infrastructure. Water ice must be located and extracted. Metals must be mined and processed. Energy systems must operate continuously. All of this under extreme environmental conditions with limited manpower and no immediate rescue. The margin for error would be small. A failed crop cycle on Earth leads to economic strain and humanitarian crises, but not extinction. A failed crop cycle in a Martian colony could threaten everyone inside it. Redundancy would be essential. Backup systems for oxygen, water, power, and food would multiply complexity. Complexity increases failure points. There is also the question of planetary protection. If Mars harbors even microbial life, dormant or subsurface, introducing Earth organisms could contaminate it irreversibly. Colonization might destroy our ability to study pristine Martian ecosystems. The ethical implications are profound. Do we have the right to transform another planet before fully understanding it. The argument that humanity needs a backup planet often assumes inevitability of catastrophe on Earth. Yet the resources required to attempt Martian colonization are vast. Some argue those resources might be better spent preserving and stabilizing Earth itself. Mars may represent expansion, but it may also reflect a deeper anxiety about our own planet's fragility. Colonization is often framed as heroic, but survival on Mars would not feel heroic day to day. It would feel procedural, mechanical, controlled. Every airlock cycle would be deliberate, every maintenance check routine, every external excursion dangerous. Dust infiltration alone presents serious hazards. Martian dust is fine, abrasive, and electrostatically clingy. It can damage equipment and pose respiratory risks. Mars is not merely empty, it is actively erosive. And unlike Earth, it offers no natural recovery mechanisms. On Earth, if machinery fails, we step outside into breathable air. On Mars, stepping outside without protection is lethal. This constant dependency on systems may shape culture itself. Would Martian society prioritize caution over risk? Would innovation be slowed by the need for safety? Would political structures differ in an environment where survival depends on strict adherence to protocol? Colonization is not just about planting seeds in red soil. It is about constructing an entirely artificial biosphere, industrial base, and social system inside a world that does not support them naturally. Even if technology continues advancing, even if launch costs decrease dramatically, even if nuclear power provides stable energy, the fundamental planetary constraints remain. Thin atmosphere, no magnetic shield, low gravity, toxic soil, extreme cold, distance from Earth. Terraforming may soften some of these edges over centuries, but the scale of transformation required is staggering. And perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is this: Mars does not fail because we lack ambition. It challenges us because it is a planetary environment shaped by physics we cannot easily override. Human beings are extraordinarily adaptable. We have built cities in deserts, on ice, beneath seas, but all of those environments exist within Earth's protective envelope. Mars is outside that envelope, and that difference changes everything. As we continue, we will move deeper into long-term sustainability. Whether a Martian civilization could ever reach a point where it no longer depends on Earth at all. Because colonization is not about arrival, it is about permanence. And permanence on Mars may be the most difficult challenge humanity has ever considered. If building a colony on Mars is an engineering challenge, then sustaining it for generations is something even more fragile, a biological experiment on a planetary scale. A short-term mission can rely on supplies brought from Earth. A medium-term outpost can depend on regular resupply missions. But a true colony, one meant to last centuries, must become biologically self-sustaining. That is where the dream begins to collide with reality. Life on Earth does not exist in isolation. It is supported by overlapping systems, carbon cycles, nitrogen cycles, microbial ecosystems, pollinators, decomposers, oceans, forests, atmosphere. Each layer supports another. The balance is not simple. It is dynamic, complex, and self-regulating. On Mars, none of those natural cycles exist. Inside a Martian colony, everything biological would need to be recreated artificially. Plants would grow in controlled environments. Air would be circulated through life support systems. Water would be filtered and recycled constantly. Waste would be processed and repurposed. Microbial communities would need to be carefully managed. And unlike Earth, where failure in one ecosystem can sometimes be absorbed by others, a Martian colony would be closed. Closed systems are unforgiving. Even on Earth, closed ecological experiments have struggled. Biosphere 2, a sealed artificial ecosystem built in the 1990s, was an ambitious attempt to simulate a self-sustaining environment. It contained plants, animals, soil, and even a miniature ocean. Despite careful planning, oxygen levels dropped unexpectedly. Species balances shifted. Insects and microbes behaved in unanticipated ways, and that experiment took place on Earth. With Earth's gravity, Earth's atmosphere outside the walls, and Earth's resources available in case of failure. On Mars, there is no external buffer. Imagine a colony of several hundred people living inside interconnected habitats. Crops are grown hydroponically. Water is recycled with near-perfect efficiency. Air is processed through oxygen generators and carbon dioxide scrubbers. Now imagine a fungal outbreak affecting crops. On Earth, food shortages can be mitigated by imports. On Mars, food production failures would threaten everyone simultaneously. Redundancy would be essential. Multiple crop varieties, isolated growing chambers, backup food supplies. But redundancy increases complexity. Complexity increases maintenance. Every mechanical system has a failure rate. Pumps break, filters clog, circuits degrade, sensors malfunction. On Earth, parts can be replaced quickly. On Mars, spare components must either be manufactured locally or shipped from Earth, which may take months. Manufacturing locally sounds ideal, but advanced manufacturing requires raw materials, precision tools, skilled technicians, and energy. A Martian colony aiming for independence would need to mine metals, refine them, produce polymers, fabricate electronics, and build complex machinery. That means constructing an entire industrial supply chain from scratch on a barren planet. Mining on Mars would not resemble mining on Earth. The low gravity changes how equipment behaves. The thin atmosphere reduces cooling efficiency for heavy machinery. Dust infiltration complicates moving parts. Energy must be carefully allocated. Even if basic materials like iron and aluminum could be extracted from Martian regolith, producing advanced semiconductors or medical equipment would require extraordinary infrastructure. Which brings us to medicine. A sustainable colony must handle medical emergencies without relying on Earth. Surgery, childbirth, chronic illness management, all must occur locally. Medical equipment must be sterilized, repaired, replaced. Pharmaceuticals must be manufactured or stored long-term. Radiation exposure adds another layer of complexity. Over time, increased radiation may elevate cancer risk. Monitoring and treatment require diagnostic tools, imaging systems, laboratory equipment that are expensive and delicate. Human reproduction in low gravity remains largely unstudied. We do not know how gestation proceeds under Martian gravity. We do not know whether embryonic development is affected. We do not know how bone formation, cardiovascular systems, and immune systems adapt in such conditions. A colony is not merely a group of adults surviving in isolation. It is families, children, elderly individuals, multi-generational populations. If even one biological variable behaves unexpectedly, if immune systems weaken, if bone density declines irreversibly, if fertility is compromised, the long-term viability of the colony is threatened. Psychology, too, becomes central. Life inside a Martian colony would be highly structured. Safety protocols would govern daily existence. Airlocks, radiation alerts, maintenance schedules, all would become routine. But routine can become monotony. Earth offers sensory richness. Wind, rain, forests, oceans, wildlife, changing seasons. Mars offers red dust, confined corridors, artificial lighting, and mechanical sounds. Even if colonies create greenhouses and simulated natural environments, they remain controlled simulations. The knowledge of fragility may weigh heavily on residents. On Earth, stepping outside offers relief. On Mars, stepping outside without protection is fatal. The environment cannot be escaped. Extended confinement has measurable psychological effects. Studies from Antarctic stations and space missions show increased stress, mood changes, and interpersonal tension in isolated groups. Mars would amplify these conditions with permanent distance from Earth. Communication delays also matter. A simple conversation between Mars and Earth involves minutes of delay each way. In emergencies, emotional support cannot be immediate. Cultural connection may weaken over generations. Over time, a Martian colony might develop its own identity, distinct from Earth. Cultural divergence could be natural, even inevitable, but it might also create political tension. Would Mars remain politically tied to Earth? Would it seek autonomy? Would Earth governments invest consistently over centuries in a colony that may not yield immediate economic return? Economic sustainability remains uncertain. Mars does not offer obvious exports. Transporting goods back to Earth is expensive and energy-intensive. Any economic model for colonization must justify continuous investment. Some argue that technological spin-offs or scientific discoveries justify the effort. Others suggest mining rare materials. But extracting resources on Mars and transporting them to Earth competes with resources already available on Earth or in near-Earth space. The harsh truth is that colonization may not be economically profitable for generations, if ever. It may instead be a long-term scientific outpost supported by political will and human aspiration. Aspiration, however, is not immune to fatigue. Over decades, political priorities shift. Economic downturns occur. Conflicts arise. A colony dependent on Earth's consistent support could become vulnerable to decisions made millions of kilometers away. True independence would require a closed-loop economy, energy production, food production, manufacturing, governance, all self-contained. But self-containment demands scale. A colony of 50 people cannot sustain industrial complexity. A colony of thousands might approach it, but transporting thousands of people and the infrastructure to support them multiplies initial costs dramatically. And yet, even if we imagine a thriving Martian settlement, protected beneath regolith, powered by nuclear reactors, growing food hydroponically, the environment outside remains unchanged. The thin atmosphere persists, the radiation persists, the gravity persists. Mars would not transform into Earth simply because humans live there. Colonists would adapt culturally and technologically, but biologically and physically, they would remain in a foreign environment. There is also a philosophical dimension. Colonization implies permanence. But permanence on Mars depends entirely on technological continuity. If advanced systems fail and cannot be replaced, the colony may not recover. Earth's ecosystems recover from natural disasters because they are self-sustaining. Mars would not offer such resilience. Every aspect of life would be contingent on maintenance. Maintenance, in turn, depends on knowledge transfer across generations. Children born on Mars would need education, not just in culture and history, but in survival engineering. The knowledge of how to maintain life support systems would be essential to civilization. In that sense, Mars colonization may resemble a permanently operating spacecraft, a planetary-scale life support module. And spacecraft are not designed to last centuries without overhaul. All of this does not mean that humans cannot live on Mars for periods of time. It means that transforming Mars into a fully independent second Earth is vastly more complex than popular imagination suggests. Colonization is not a single event. It is an ongoing commitment to engineering against planetary reality. And planetary reality is relentless. As we move forward, we will examine perhaps the most profound question of all. Even if we overcome engineering and biology, even if we build thriving habitats and sustainable systems, should we? Because Mars may not only challenge our technology, it may challenge our understanding of what it means to belong to a planet. If we imagine that engineering challenges can be solved, that habitats can be built, that radiation can be shielded and water extracted, we eventually arrive at a deeper and more unsettling question. What happens to humanity itself on Mars? Colonization is not only about survival in harsh conditions. It is about transformation, slow, subtle, and irreversible. Mars is not Earth in miniature. It is a fundamentally different gravitational, atmospheric, and environmental system. Over time, those differences would not simply shape technology, they would shape people. Let us begin with gravity. On Mars, gravity is roughly 38% of what we experience on Earth. At first glance, that may seem like a novelty. Lighter steps, higher jumps, easier lifting. But gravity is not just about movement. It influences bone density, muscle development, cardiovascular function, fluid distribution, and even how organs position themselves inside the body. Astronauts in microgravity experience measurable bone loss within months. Their muscles weaken, their spines elongate slightly, fluids shift toward the head. Vision can change. Even with rigorous daily exercise, the human body struggles to maintain its Earth-adapted structure in reduced gravity. Mars is not weightless, but it is permanently lighter. What would decades in such an environment do to the human skeleton? Would bone density stabilize at a lower level? Would fractures become more common? Would children raised in Martian gravity develop different proportions, longer limbs relative to torso, or different muscle structure? And if so, would those individuals be able to return to Earth? Imagine a child born on Mars who has never felt Earth's full gravitational pull. If they attempted to stand under Earth gravity, their cardiovascular system might struggle. Their bones might not tolerate the stress. Returning home might be physically impossible. In that scenario, colonization becomes permanent separation. Mars would not simply host humans. It would gradually produce Martians, biologically shaped by a different planet. Then there is radiation. Even with shielding, complete protection is unlikely. Over long periods, increased exposure to cosmic rays may alter genetic stability. DNA damage accumulates. The body repairs much of it, but not perfectly. Mutations increase slightly. In a single lifetime, that risk may be manageable. Across generations, it becomes more complex. Would Martian colonists require genetic screening programs? Would medical science adapt to a new baseline of radiation exposure? Would evolution begin to act differently in such an environment? It is a strange thought that colonization may not only extend humanity outward, but also begin to divide it inward. Psychology may diverge as well. On Earth, our sense of time is shaped by seasons, weather, natural cycles. On Mars, days are similar in length to Earth's, but the year is nearly twice as long. Seasons last longer. Dust storms can obscure the sky for weeks. Colonists would live under artificial lighting much of the time. Natural landscapes would be seen through thick glass or protective suits. What does it mean to grow up without rain, without oceans, without forests? Human identity has always been tied to environment. Our myths, cultures, and languages reflect the lands we inhabit. A Martian society would evolve under red skies and thin sunlight. Its art, philosophy, and worldview might gradually diverge from Earth's. Communication delays reinforce this separation. Even at closest approach, messages take minutes to travel between planets. At greater distances, the delay grows. Real-time conversation would be impossible. Cultural exchange would feel distant. News from Earth would arrive with delay. Emotional responses would be asynchronous. The sense of immediacy, of shared experience, would weaken. Over time, Mars might not see itself as an extension of Earth, but as something distinct. Political independence may follow naturally. A society that cannot rely on immediate assistance may demand autonomy. Yet autonomy brings its own vulnerabilities. Mars would lack Earth's biodiversity. It would lack vast natural reserves. Its entire biosphere would be engineered. Any ecological imbalance could be catastrophic, which leads us to governance. Colonization is often imagined as heroic pioneers building a new civilization. But daily life would require strict regulation. Air usage, water recycling, food allocation, all would be carefully monitored. Freedom might look different in a sealed habitat. Imagine a society where opening an external door without authorization could endanger everyone, where energy consumption is rationed because power supply is limited, where population growth must be controlled because habitat space is finite. In such conditions, governance may lean towards centralization. Efficiency may override individual autonomy. Collective survival may take precedence over personal preference. Would that shape Martian political philosophy? Would a society built around survival become more cooperative or more restrictive? And what happens if systems fail? On Earth, failure is often local. A power outage in one city does not collapse the entire planet. On Mars, a major systems failure could threaten the entire colony simultaneously. Redundancy reduces risk, but cannot eliminate it entirely. Colonization, therefore, demands resilience at unprecedented levels. Resilience in engineering, resilience in biology, resilience in psychology, resilience in governance, and all of it operating millions of kilometers from Earth. There is also the moral dimension. Mars is not simply empty terrain. It is a planetary body with its own history. Ancient riverbeds, volcanic plains, ice caps, geological records spanning billions of years. If microbial life once existed, or still exists, beneath the surface, colonization could destroy it. Even if life does not exist today, Mars holds scientific information about planetary evolution that may be altered irreversibly by large-scale human presence. Are we prepared to transform another world before fully understanding it? Colonization often frames Mars as a backup plan, a second home in case Earth suffers catastrophe. But building a sustainable Martian civilization would require immense global cooperation, investment, and technological stability. If humanity cannot maintain stability on Earth, can it truly sustain it on Mars? Perhaps the deeper lesson is not about impossibility in absolute terms. It is about proportionality. Mars can be visited. Mars can host research stations. Mars may even support small, carefully engineered settlements, but transforming it into a second Earth, a fully independent, thriving biosphere with open skies and breathable air, would require altering planetary physics on a scale that borders on science fiction. And even if we could do it, we would still face gravity that cannot be changed, radiation that cannot be fully erased, and distance that cannot be eliminated. Mars might always remain a world where survival depends on machines. On Earth, life depends on Earth. On Mars, life would depend on us. That distinction is enormous. It means that if humanity falters technologically, politically, or economically, Mars offers no safety net. It means that colonization does not free us from fragility. It multiplies it. And perhaps that is the harshest realization. Mars is not impossible because it is unreachable. It is impossible because it demands permanent perfection, a perfection of engineering, a perfection of cooperation, a perfection of long-term stability. Human history suggests that such perfection is rare, and so as we continue, we must confront the final question. Is colonizing Mars a necessary step in human evolution, or is it a mirror reflecting back to us how extraordinary, how rare, and how irreplaceable Earth truly is? If Mars forces us to confront engineering limits and biological uncertainty, it also forces us to confront something more uncomfortable: motivation. Why do we want to colonize Mars? The most common answer is survival, a backup planet, insurance against asteroid impacts, climate collapse, nuclear war, or unforeseen catastrophe. The logic seems straightforward. If humanity exists on more than one world, extinction becomes less likely. But this argument assumes that a Martian colony would be truly independent, capable of surviving if Earth were lost. And that assumption is far more fragile than it appears. In its early stages, any Martian settlement would depend heavily on Earth. Supplies, spare parts, medicine, expertise, all would flow outward from our home planet. Even decades into colonization, complex technologies such as advanced electronics, precision manufacturing tools, and pharmaceuticals would likely still rely on Earth's industrial base. If Earth suffered a sudden global collapse, a Martian colony might not survive long without resupply. Self-sufficiency requires scale. It requires large populations to maintain diverse skills. It requires local manufacturing capacity for everything from microchips to surgical equipment. It requires redundant energy systems, agricultural diversity, medical infrastructure, and educational continuity. Building such a complete civilization from scratch on Mars would take not just decades, but generations. And during that time, Earth would remain the primary support system. The backup planet narrative simplifies this reality. A fragile outpost is not a backup civilization. And if Earth were to face catastrophe severe enough to disrupt global infrastructure, Mars might lose its lifeline before it ever became independent. There's also a deeper philosophical question embedded in the backup argument. If we fear losing Earth, why not invest those same resources into preserving it? Mars colonization demands enormous financial, technological, and human capital. Launch systems, habitat construction, life support engineering, energy infrastructure. All of these require sustained global effort. The same level of effort applied to climate stabilization, renewable energy, ecosystem restoration, and planetary defense might strengthen Earth directly. This is not a rejection of exploration. Exploration is part of human nature, but colonization carries different weight than exploration. Exploration seeks knowledge, colonization seeks permanence, and permanence on Mars may never match the stability Earth already provides naturally. There is also the economic lens. Historically, colonization on Earth was often driven by resource extraction and expansion. New territories offered fertile land, minerals, trade routes. Mars offers none of these in easily accessible form. Its resources are real: water ice, regolith, rich in certain elements. But extracting and processing them requires advanced infrastructure. Transporting materials back to Earth would be costly and energy-intensive. Near-Earth asteroids may offer more accessible mining opportunities than Mars, with far less environmental overhead. So what economic model sustains a Martian civilization? Scientific research? Tourism? Prestige? Perhaps prestige plays a larger role than we admit. To land humans on another planet would be a defining achievement of civilization. To build a permanent settlement would be historic. There is emotional power in the idea of becoming a multi-planetary species. But emotional power does not override planetary physics. Mars remains cold, its atmosphere remains thin, its gravity remains low, its radiation environment remains harsh. Even if the first settlers succeed, their success would rely on constant vigilance. Systems must never fail. Repairs must always be possible. Generations must remain committed to maintenance. The romance of red horizons fades in the face of daily mechanical reality. Imagine waking every morning knowing that outside the habitat, the air is unbreathable and lethal, that your life depends on filtration systems humming quietly behind the walls, that a meteor strike, solar flare, or mechanical malfunction could threaten your entire community. On Earth, risk is distributed. On Mars, risk is concentrated. And yet, there is something undeniably compelling about the challenge. Perhaps Mars is not meant to be easy. Perhaps its difficulty is precisely what draws us. But colonization is not a temporary challenge. It is a permanent commitment. We must also consider time. Civilizations on Earth rise and fall. Empires expand and collapse. Technologies advance and become obsolete. Political systems shift. Economies fluctuate. A Martian colony must survive not just physical conditions, but human variability across centuries. What happens if Earth's priorities change? If funding dries up? If geopolitical conflict redirects attention inward? Would Mars become neglected? A colony abandoned by its home planet might struggle to sustain itself, especially if it has not yet achieved full industrial independence. In this sense, Mars colonization may be less about conquering another world and more about mastering ourselves. It demands unprecedented global cooperation. It requires stable governance. It depends on long-term planning beyond election cycles or quarterly profits. It asks humanity to think in centuries. Few societies have demonstrated that level of sustained coordination. And then there is the ethical frontier. If Mars is lifeless, colonization transforms it irrevocably. If microbial life exists, colonization may extinguish it before we fully understand it. Earth's history shows that introducing new species into isolated ecosystems can have devastating consequences. On Mars, the introduction of Earth microbes would be inevitable with human presence. We would not simply visit Mars, we would change it. Some argue that spreading life is a moral good, that life is precious and should expand wherever possible. Others argue that preserving untouched planetary environments has intrinsic value. There is no simple answer, but colonization is not neutral. It is transformative, and transformation carries responsibility. Perhaps the harshest reality of colonizing Mars is not that it is physically impossible. It is that it demands clarity. Clarity about why we are going. Clarity about what we expect to achieve. Clarity about what we are willing to risk, biologically, economically, ethically. Mars does not offer easy rewards. It offers difficulty layered upon difficulty. But perhaps that difficulty reveals something important. Earth is not simply convenient. It is extraordinary. It provides breathable air, stable gravity, protective magnetic shielding, abundant liquid water, fertile soil, and complex ecosystems, all without maintenance fees or engineering oversight. Mars offers none of that freely. If we choose to live there, we must build everything ourselves. And in doing so, we may discover that the greatest lesson Mars teaches us is not about escape. It is about appreciation. Appreciation for the rare balance of conditions that make Earth habitable. Appreciation for the systems that support life effortlessly. Appreciation for the thin blue atmosphere that protects us from radiation and holds warmth close. Mars may still be explored. Humans may still walk its surface. Research stations may still rise beneath its red sky. But colonization, in the sense of creating a self-sustaining, independent second Earth, remains a challenge so vast that it forces us to rethink what we mean by possible. And perhaps that is the ultimate truth. Mars is not impossible because we lack rockets. It is impossible because it asks us to replicate an entire planet. And Earth, for all its flaws, is not easily replaced. If we strip away the headlines, the ambition, the billionaire optimism, and the cinematic rocket launches, what remains is a quieter, more difficult realization. Mars does not solve the human condition. It amplifies it. The dream of colonizing Mars is often framed as progress, the next step in human evolution, from oceans to continents, from continents to space, a natural continuation of exploration. But there is a subtle shift between exploration and relocation. Exploration seeks to understand. Relocation seeks to escape. And many of the arguments for Mars are rooted, at least partly, in fear. Fear of climate collapse, fear of war, fear of extinction-level events, fear that Earth may not remain stable forever, but relocating a small fraction of humanity to a fragile outpost on Mars does not eliminate those fears. It redistributes them. If Earth suffers environmental degradation due to mismanagement, how do we guarantee that a Martian colony will avoid similar mistakes? If geopolitical instability disrupts global cooperation, how do we ensure consistent long-term support for an interplanetary settlement? Mars may not be a solution to Earth's problems. It may simply mirror them under harsher conditions, and those conditions are not abstract. Let us return once more to the physical reality of Mars. Its atmosphere is thin and dominated by carbon dioxide. There is no oxygen to breathe, no stable surface water, no magnetic shield. The radiation environment remains persistent and dangerous, even if we perfect habitat construction, even if nuclear reactors provide steady energy, even if advanced recycling systems approach near total efficiency. Survival would still depend on continuous human oversight. Earth does not require oversight to remain habitable. Mars would. That difference changes everything. A Martian colony would not resemble a frontier town or a new continent. It would resemble a permanently operating life support station the size of a city. Every square meter of breathable air would be manufactured, every drop of water filtered, every crop monitored. The systems would need to be fail-safe, but also repairable with limited resources. Imagine a scenario decades into colonization. A major life support system fails due to unforeseen wear. Replacement parts require specialized alloys that must be refined locally. Refining those alloys requires functioning mining equipment. Mining equipment depends on energy supply and maintenance crews. A single point of failure could cascade. Redundancy mitigates risk, but redundancy multiplies complexity. Complexity demands expertise. Expertise requires education and generational knowledge transfer. Colonization, then, becomes not just a technological challenge, but a cultural one. A Martian society would need to prioritize engineering literacy at its core. Survival would depend on technical competence across broad segments of the population. Failure to maintain that competence could have consequences far more immediate than on Earth. And yet, even if a colony thrives technologically, there remains the unchangeable reality of gravity. Mars' gravity cannot be increased, not with current or foreseeable technology. Artificial gravity can be simulated in rotating habitats, but entire planetary gravity fields are beyond our reach. This means that over time, Martian humans may physically diverge. Imagine 3 or 4 generations born and raised under lighter gravity. Their musculature, skeletal density, and cardiovascular systems may adapt. Evolution may act slowly, subtly shaping physiology. In such a scenario, Mars is no longer just a colony. It is a branch of humanity, and that divergence carries profound implications. Would Martians feel fully connected to Earth, or would they see themselves as distinct, shaped by different constraints and challenges? Would political tensions emerge? Would cultural identity shift? History on Earth suggests that geographic separation fosters divergence. Planetary separation would amplify it. Then there is the emotional dimension. Colonization narratives often highlight courage and determination, but daily life may feel more constrained than heroic. There are no spontaneous walks in nature, no oceans to visit, no forests to wander through. Even outdoor excursions require full protective suits and strict time limits. The Martian sky would not offer blue horizons. It would glow faintly pink under a thin atmosphere. the sun would appear smaller. Dust storms could obscure visibility for weeks. Would future generations romanticize Earth the way early explorers romanticized distant homelands? Or would Earth become a distant myth, a world remembered but never experienced firsthand? Time changes perception. Over centuries, a Martian civilization may normalize its constraints. Artificial parks may simulate Earth-like environments. Cultural rituals may develop around survival systems. What seems harsh to us might become ordinary to them. But ordinary does not mean easy. At its core, colonization demands sustainability, and sustainability on Mars depends on a delicate balance of energy, resources, and human cooperation. Energy production must be stable. Solar power is vulnerable to dust storms. Nuclear power requires maintenance and careful handling. Backup systems must always be available. Water extraction must be efficient. Food production must be diversified. Waste must be recycled with near-perfect precision. Even then, environmental unpredictability remains. Mars experiences global dust storms that can last for months. These storms reduce sunlight, coat equipment in fine abrasive particles, and test system durability. Every design must anticipate failure. Every structure must withstand environmental extremes. And all of this must operate millions of kilometers from immediate assistance. There is also the matter of scale. A small outpost is manageable. A large, self-sustaining city is exponentially more complex. As population increases, resource demand increases. More food, more water, more energy, more infrastructure, more governance structures. Growth amplifies fragility unless infrastructure scales flawlessly. Perhaps the harshest reality is this: colonizing Mars does not remove humanity from vulnerability. It places humanity in an environment where vulnerability is constant. Earth's ecosystems provide resilience. On Mars, resilience must be engineered. And engineered resilience is never as forgiving as natural systems refined over billions of years. This does not mean Mars should never be visited. Human exploration has always expanded knowledge and perspective. Mars missions can deepen our understanding of planetary science, climate evolution, and the origins of life. But colonization, in the sense of creating a second independent cradle of civilization, remains a challenge of extraordinary magnitude. The dream persists because it symbolizes hope. Hope that humanity can transcend its limits. Hope that our species can survive beyond one fragile planet. Hope that exploration is destiny. Yet hope must be balanced with realism. Mars will not become Earth in our lifetimes. Its gravity will remain lighter. Its sky will remain thin. Its radiation will remain present. Its soil will remain toxic without processing. And every colony will remain a carefully maintained bubble of artificial life in a vast red desert. Perhaps, in the end, the true lesson of Mars is not about impossibility in absolute terms. It is about humility. Humility in the face of planetary physics. Humility in recognizing that Earth's habitability is not ordinary. Humility in understanding that building a world is far more difficult than imagining one. Mars challenges us to look at our own planet differently, to see the atmosphere not as background, but as shield, to see oceans not as scenery, but as stabilizers, to see gravity not as given, but as gift. And perhaps that is the quiet conclusion beneath the bold headlines. Colonizing Mars may not be impossible in a strict mathematical sense, but achieving a truly independent, thriving Martian civilization, one that no longer depends on Earth and can endure for centuries, remains so demanding that it forces us to reconsider what possible really means. Mars is not a second Earth waiting patiently for us. It is a test. And whether that test leads to expansion or reflection may say more about humanity than about the red planet itself. If we imagine for a moment that humanity succeeds in placing a permanent settlement on Mars, a network of habitats beneath regolith, powered by nuclear reactors, sustained by hydroponic agriculture and advanced recycling systems, we arrive at a different kind of question. Not can we survive, but what kind of life would that survival create? Because colonization is not just about enduring an environment. It is about shaping a civilization within it. On Earth, our societies are built upon abundance, even when unevenly distributed. Abundance of air, of sunlight, of ecosystems that replenish themselves. Abundance allows for flexibility. It allows inefficiency. It allows creativity that does not directly relate to survival. Mars offers no such abundance. Everything would be calculated. Air would be rationed in subtle ways, monitored constantly. Water would circulate through closed loops. Energy consumption would be tracked. Waste would be processed meticulously. In such an environment, survival becomes central to culture. Children growing up on Mars would understand from an early age that systems matter, that discipline matters, that maintenance matters. A loose bolt is not an inconvenience. It is a threat. A cracked seal is not a small defect. It is potential catastrophe. This awareness might foster extraordinary responsibility, or it might create persistent anxiety. Earth allows escape from awareness of fragility. We do not think about the atmosphere holding us in place. We do not calculate oxygen levels before walking outside. The planet sustains us invisibly. Mars would never allow forgetfulness, and over generations, that difference may shape identity itself. Imagine a society that has never felt rain, never seen clouds drift naturally across a thick blue sky, never walked barefoot on grass or stood beside an ocean. Their sky would be filtered through glass, their green spaces engineered, their contact with nature mediated by systems. Would they long for Earth? Or would Earth become abstract, a distant origin story rather than a lived experience? Cultural memory fades over time. By the third or fourth generation, Earth may feel like mythology, the idea of forests stretching to the horizon, oceans roaring against cliffs, storms rolling across continents. These may seem like exaggerated tales of another world. In that scenario, Mars is no longer an extension of Earth. It is its own civilizational branch. And yet, even as identity shifts, dependency remains. No matter how advanced a Martian colony becomes, it exists within planetary constraints that cannot be negotiated. Gravity will not strengthen. The atmosphere will not thicken naturally. Radiation will not disappear. Survival will remain technological, which introduces a sobering vulnerability. Technological civilizations are fragile. They depend on knowledge continuity, infrastructure stability, and social cohesion. Earth's vast networks allow partial failures without total collapse. Mars would not have that margin. If a Martian colony faced internal conflict, political instability, resource disputes, governance breakdown, the consequences would be immediate. and severe. Cooperation would not merely be ideal, it would be necessary. Would such necessity produce unity, or would it intensify pressure? History suggests that scarcity can unite people, but it can also divide them. Now consider the possibility of generational drift. Suppose Mars achieves partial self-sufficiency. Local manufacturing develops. Education systems train engineers, scientists, and technicians. Agriculture stabilizes. Population grows slowly but steadily. At that point, Earth may become less central. Trade between planets might continue, but dependence decreases. Political autonomy may increase. Cultural narratives diverge. Mars might begin to see itself not as a colony, but as a civilization born of hardship, forged in constraint. And that identity could be powerful. It could foster resilience and pride, but it could also deepen separation. Distance reinforces difference. Communication delays ensure that no shared moment between Earth and Mars is truly simultaneous. Conversations lag. Emotional responses trail behind. Shared global experiences fragment. Mars would live in its own time. In that separation lies a paradox. The original dream of colonization often frames Mars as humanity's salvation, a second chance, a safety net. But if Mars becomes independent, shaped by different gravity, different culture, and different constraints, it may no longer serve as a mirror of Earth. It may become something new, and newness carries uncertainty. There is also the question of scale over centuries. Terraforming, if pursued, would take generations. But terraforming does not change gravity. It does not recreate Earth's magnetic shield easily. It may warm the planet, thicken the air slightly, perhaps melt ice. But the transformation would be partial and fragile. Mars would never become Earth in full. Its lower mass means it cannot hold a thick atmosphere as easily. Its internal heat engine remains weak. Its geological processes are slow. Even in optimistic scenarios, Martian civilization would exist within limits that Earth does not impose. And perhaps that is the core of the harsh reality. Mars does not offer freedom from limits. It intensifies them. Where Earth provides buffers, Mars provides exposure. Where Earth offers abundance, Mars offers precision. Where Earth allows mistakes to fade into recovery, Mars magnifies mistakes into crisis. This does not make Mars meaningless. On the contrary, it may make Mars profoundly valuable as a scientific and philosophical frontier. Mars forces humanity to confront planetary systems at their most fundamental level. It teaches us what is required for habitability. It reveals how delicate atmospheres can be lost. It shows us what happens when magnetic shields disappear. In studying Mars, we may better understand Earth. But colonization is not merely study. It is commitment. And commitment on Mars would require centuries of stable intention across shifting political landscapes, economic cycles, technological revolutions, and social transformations. Few human endeavors have sustained focus across such time spans without interruption. So perhaps the final harsh truth is not that Mars is absolutely impossible. It is that Mars is relentlessly demanding. It demands technical excellence without pause. It demands biological resilience under uncertainty. It demands cultural cohesion in isolation. It demands long-term vision beyond historical precedent. It demands humility before planetary physics. And in demanding all of that, it may ultimately teach us something unexpected. Not that we should never go. Not that exploration is folly. But that Earth, fragile as it seems, is already the most extraordinary life support system we will ever know. Mars may become a research outpost. It may host pioneers and scientists. It may even support small, tightly engineered communities, but transforming it into a second Earth, into a fully independent, thriving world with open skies and breathable air, remains a challenge so immense that it reshapes our understanding of possibility. In the end, Mars may not be humanity's escape. It may be humanity's mirror, reflecting back to us the astonishing complexity of life on Earth and reminding us that before we attempt to build a new world from dust and machines, we might first learn to care for the one that sustains us effortlessly. When we talk about colonizing Mars, we often focus on rockets, habitats, and engineering. We talk about propulsion systems, radiation shields, hydroponic farms, and closed-loop life support. We talk about solving problems. But there is another dimension of the challenge that receives far less attention. Time, not travel time, not mission duration, civilizational time. Because colonizing Mars is not a 10-year project. It is not even a 50-year project. It is a commitment measured in centuries. And that changes everything. On Earth, most political systems struggle to plan beyond election cycles. Economic markets react to quarterly reports. Even large infrastructure projects rarely extend beyond a few decades of sustained focus. Mars demands something radically different. To build a permanent, self-sustaining civilization on Mars would require continuous technological maintenance, steady population growth, uninterrupted supply chains for decades, and eventually centuries of consistent support. There is no pause button. A Martian colony cannot be mothballed during a recession. It cannot be temporarily abandoned during political instability. It cannot simply wait for better funding conditions. Its life support systems must operate every minute of every day. Its reactors must run. Its oxygen recyclers must function. Its water purification loops must circulate. Its structural seals must hold. For generations. Imagine the first settlers. They arrive with advanced equipment, constant support from Earth, regular resupply missions, and intense global attention. They are pioneers, heroes. But what about their grandchildren? Will Earth still be watching? Will Earth still be funding? Or will Mars become a distant, expensive outpost, competing with other priorities, climate crises, economic challenges, geopolitical tensions, technological revolutions? History shows us something uncomfortable. Human attention shifts. Ambitious projects can lose momentum. Public enthusiasm fades. Budgets tighten. Leadership changes. Mars cannot afford that instability. A Martian colony must assume continuity, and continuity is one of the hardest things for human civilizations to sustain. There is also the issue of scale. Early colonies would be small, perhaps dozens of people, eventually hundreds. Small populations are fragile. They face genetic challenges. They face social pressures. They face skill bottlenecks. In a small group, every individual matters disproportionately. If a key engineer becomes ill, expertise is lost. If a critical technician leaves for Earth, knowledge gaps emerge. If interpersonal conflict arises, it cannot be escaped by simply moving to another city. Mars would not offer cities. It would offer sealed habitats connected by pressurized corridors, surrounded by lethal emptiness. Social strain in such conditions is not hypothetical. Studies of Antarctic research stations submarine crews, and long-duration space missions show that isolation amplifies tension. Now imagine that tension lasting decades, not months, decades. Children born on Mars would grow up in an environment no human evolved for. Lower gravity would shape their bodies differently. Muscles and bones might develop under reduced load. Even if artificial gravity solutions exist, they may not perfectly replicate Earth conditions. Would those children be able to visit Earth easily, returning to a gravity field nearly 3 times stronger than what their bodies are accustomed to? Could be physically taxing, perhaps even dangerous. Over time, a physical divergence could emerge. Mars-born humans might not simply be culturally distinct, they might be biologically distinct in subtle ways. And that possibility introduces profound ethical questions. Are we prepared to create a branch of humanity adapted to a harsher world, permanently separated from the one that gave rise to it? Colonization implies permanence, and permanence implies irreversible change. There is also the matter of infrastructure inheritance. On Earth, infrastructure evolves organically. Roads, power grids, water systems, they expand and adapt. When a system fails, nearby alternatives often exist. Mars would begin with a tightly integrated, centralized infrastructure. Energy, air, water, food, all interconnected. In such a system, cascading failure is a constant risk. A single malfunction could propagate. Redundancy would be essential, but redundancy adds complexity. Complexity increases maintenance demands. Maintenance demands training and discipline. Generational continuity of knowledge becomes critical. On Earth, knowledge loss is often buffered by institutions, universities, industries, governments. Mars would have to recreate these institutions from scratch under pressure. Education would not be optional. It would be survival. Every generation would need to train the next, not just in culture, but in engineering, biology, medicine, and systems management. Mars would produce a society of technicians, and that may shape creativity itself. Would art flourish in such an environment? Would philosophy deepen under the awareness of fragility, or would survival pressures narrow focus to practicality? Perhaps both. Scarcity can sharpen imagination, but it can also constrain it. There is another dimension to civilizational time: planetary change. Mars is not static. Dust storms can envelop the entire planet for weeks or months. These storms can reduce solar power dramatically. Fine dust infiltrates machinery. It accumulates on panels, clogs joints, abrades seals. On Earth, storms pass through ecosystems that regenerate. On Mars, storms sweep across a barren landscape that offers no shelter except what humans build. Long-term habitation means long-term adaptation to these cycles. Then there is the sun. Over millions of years, solar output gradually increases. That matters little in human lifespans. But colonization is not about one lifetime. It is about many. Terraforming proposals often assume we can warm Mars by releasing greenhouse gases. But controlling planetary climates is not trivial. Feedback loops can spiral. Thin atmospheres can dissipate into space. Mars lacks a strong magnetic field. Solar wind continues to strip particles from its atmosphere. Even if we thicken it, will it remain thick? Would colonists need to continually replenish atmospheric gases, essentially maintaining a planet-sized life support system? That is not a temporary project. That is planetary engineering as an eternal task. Mars, then, may require permanent intervention to remain marginally habitable. A civilization built on constant intervention must be extraordinarily stable, and stability across centuries is rare. Empires rise and fall, technologies shift, cultural values transform. Imagine a future Earth that loses interest in space. Imagine funding redirected elsewhere. Imagine a geopolitical fracture that disrupts interplanetary trade. What happens to Mars then? If Mars has not yet achieved complete self-sufficiency, it could face existential risk. And achieving true self-sufficiency is harder than it sounds. A closed economy must produce everything locally, from advanced electronics to pharmaceuticals to replacement reactor parts. Manufacturing at that level requires supply chains of raw materials, processing plants, and skilled labor. Mars has resources, but extracting and refining them at scale would take decades of development. During that time, dependence on Earth persists. Dependence creates vulnerability, and vulnerability under isolation magnifies risk. The harsh reality is that colonization is not just about landing and building. It is about sustaining complexity without collapse. Earth sustains complexity naturally. Its ecosystems buffer shocks. Its biodiversity adapts. Its oceans regulate temperature. Its atmosphere circulates heat. Mars offers none of that. Everything complex on Mars must be constructed deliberately. That includes food webs. Hydroponic farms may provide calories, but ecosystems are more than calories. They regulate disease, recycle waste organically, and provide psychological comfort. Would Martian colonies attempt to build miniature ecosystems? Biodomes with insects, microbes, plants, perhaps even small animals. The more complex the system, the more resilient it can be, but also the harder it is to control. Complexity can produce emergent problems. Mars colonization at scale may require humans to become planetary ecologists in the most literal sense. And that brings us back to time. Mars is patient. It has been cold and quiet for billions of years. It will remain so regardless of human ambition. Human civilization, by contrast, is brief. Industrial society has existed for only a few centuries. Modern spaceflight for mere decades. To commit to Mars is to commit to maintaining advanced technological civilization for longer than we have ever sustained it before. That is the quiet, rarely spoken challenge. The rocket launch is dramatic. The landing is spectacular. But the real test begins afterward, in the maintenance logs, in the generational handoffs, in the quiet daily routines of keeping systems alive, year after year, decade after decade. If Mars is ever colonized, the success of that endeavor will not be measured by the first footprint. It will be measured by the 100th year, by the 3rd generation, by the ability of a civilization to endure in a place that offers no forgiveness. And perhaps that is why Mars remains for now less a destination and more a question. Not just, can we go, but can we last? Because lasting under alien gravity, under relentless radiation, within fragile systems, across centuries of uncertainty, may be the hardest challenge humanity has ever considered. And until we answer that honestly, the dream of colonizing Mars remains suspended between inspiration and impossibility. There is one final assumption that quietly supports the dream of colonizing Mars. The assumption that we must, that humanity needs a second planet in order to survive. It is often framed as insurance, a backup plan, a way to protect our species from extinction. whether from asteroid impacts, climate change, nuclear war, or unknown future threats. On the surface, this logic feels reasonable. Diversify risk. Spread out. Don't keep all your eggs in one planetary basket. But when we examine it carefully, the argument becomes more complicated. Because Mars is not a second Earth. It is not a natural refuge. It is a hostile, engineered outpost that would depend on constant technological stability to remain habitable. If Earth were to experience a global catastrophe severe enough to collapse advanced civilization, would Mars fare better? Consider the scale of disaster required to make Earth unlivable for humans. Even after the worst mass extinctions in geological history, Earth remained habitable. Life persisted. The atmosphere remained breathable. The oceans did not vanish. Gravity did not weaken. Magnetic shielding did not disappear. Earth is resilient on planetary timescales. Mars is not. A Martian colony would be fragile by design. It would rely on complex machinery, precise environmental control, and uninterrupted energy supply. If Earth were to suffer a catastrophe that destroyed industrial civilization, supply chains would collapse. Replacement parts for Martian reactors, computer systems, and life support equipment would stop arriving. In such a scenario, Mars might not be a sanctuary. It might be more vulnerable than Earth. The idea of Mars as a backup assumes that technological civilization remains intact somewhere, long enough to build, maintain, and support that second world. But if civilization remains intact, then Earth remains habitable. The insurance argument reveals a paradox. Mars protects us only if we are already strong enough not to need protection. There is also the ethical dimension. Colonization narratives often speak of spreading life into the cosmos, of becoming a multiplanetary species, of ensuring that human consciousness survives for millions of years. But colonizing Mars would not preserve Earth's biosphere. It would preserve a small, carefully selected subset of humanity, those who can afford, qualify, or are chosen for the journey. If resources are finite, and they always are, then prioritizing Mars may mean diverting investment from Earth's own sustainability challenges, climate stabilization, biodiversity preservation, infrastructure resilience, which offers greater long-term security, building sealed habitats on Mars, or strengthening the only naturally habitable world we know. Mars forces us to confront our values. Are we seeking expansion because it is necessary, or because it is inspiring? Inspiration has power. It drives innovation. It unites people. The Apollo missions were not economically practical, but they transformed science and technology. Perhaps Mars serves a similar purpose, not as a final destination, but as a catalyst. Research into life support systems, renewable energy, water recycling, and closed-loop agriculture could benefit Earth profoundly. But if Mars becomes more than a research outpost, if it becomes a permanent settlement, the priorities shift. Colonization is not exploration, it is commitment. There is also the cultural question. What kind of society would emerge on Mars? In its early decades, a Martian settlement would likely be structured around necessity. Roles would be assigned based on expertise. Decisions would be shaped by survival requirements. Democracy in a sealed habitat may function differently than in an open world. If oxygen production falters, Does a colony vote on emergency procedures? Or does authority centralize around those with technical control? Small, isolated communities often evolve tight hierarchies under pressure. Would Mars develop a distinct political identity? Would it seek independence from Earth? The history of colonial settlements on Earth suggests that separation over time is almost inevitable. Distance reshapes identity. Communication delays between Earth and Mars can range from 4 to 24 minutes one way, depending on orbital positions. That delay makes real-time conversation impossible. Over generations, cultural drift would occur. Mars-born citizens might view Earth not as a homeland, but as a distant partner, or even as a distant authority. Tension could arise over resource allocation, governance, and autonomy. The dream of colonization rarely discusses the politics of distance, but politics is inseparable from human society. There is also the biological uncertainty. We do not fully understand the long-term effects of reduced gravity on human reproduction and development. Experiments in space have studied short-term physiological changes, bone density loss, muscle atrophy, fluid redistribution. But no human has conceived, gestated, and matured entirely in 1/3 gravity. If children grow up under those conditions, will their cardiovascular systems develop differently? Will their bones mineralize differently? Will their inner ears adapt to altered balance dynamics? And if so, could they ever safely return to Earth? Colonization might create a branch of humanity adapted to Mars, physically and culturally distinct. That possibility is not inherently negative, but it is transformative. Once divergence begins, it cannot easily be reversed. Mars would not simply be a new place to live, it would be the beginning of human evolution under artificial environmental pressure. And evolution does not follow human plans. There is also the psychological aspect of permanence. Living in a habitat where the outside environment is instantly lethal changes one's relationship to risk. On Earth, stepping outside is natural. The sky, the wind, the rain, they are part of daily life. On Mars, stepping outside requires layers of protection, a suit, airlocks, procedures, caution. The horizon would be visible through reinforced glass or helmet visors, but never directly felt. Generations raised under such conditions might internalize caution differently. Risk perception may become more acute, or perhaps, over time, complacency may creep in. And that is when accidents happen. Even minor failures on Mars can be fatal. A cracked seal, a damaged suit, a power outage. Colonization is not about occasional heroism. It is about routine discipline. For centuries. There is also the question of meaning. Why go? Is it curiosity? Is it ambition? Is it fear? Human history shows that exploration often carries mixed motives. Economic opportunity, strategic advantage, ideological aspiration. Mars offers limited immediate economic return. It is unlikely to produce wealth in the way that terrestrial colonies once did. Its value is symbolic and scientific. That may be enough, but symbolism must compete with practical realities. If colonization becomes primarily a prestige project, a demonstration of technological capability, its sustainability may be fragile. Projects built on prestige can be abandoned when attention shifts. Projects built on necessity endure. And here lies the final tension. Mars is not necessary for survival today. Earth remains capable of supporting billions. The technology required to colonize Mars could instead be directed toward restoring ecosystems, decarbonizing energy systems, and improving global resilience. The same closed-loop agricultural systems designed for Martian habitats could enhance food security in harsh regions on Earth. The same water recycling systems could address drought. Perhaps Mars is less a destination and more a mirror. It reveals what is difficult. It reveals what is fragile. It reveals how finely tuned Earth truly is. By studying Mars, we learn about planetary failure, how atmospheres thin, how magnetic fields fade, how water disappears. In that sense, Mars may be more valuable as a warning than as a refuge. It shows us what happens when planetary systems degrade beyond recovery. And that knowledge could strengthen our commitment to preserving Earth. Colonizing Mars is not impossible in a technical sense. Given enough resources, determination, and time, humans could establish a presence there. But the harsh reality is that colonization demands more than technology. It demands unwavering stability across generations. It demands ethical clarity about what kind of future we are creating. It demands that we understand the difference between inspiration and necessity. Perhaps one day, humans will walk beneath a Martian sky, not as explorers, but as residents. But if that day comes, it will not represent an escape from Earth. It will represent an extension of Earth's civilization, fragile, complex, and deeply dependent on continuity. Mars is not a second chance at civilization. It is a test of the first one. And until we prove that we can sustain complex systems responsibly on our own planet, the dream of sustaining them on another remains an aspiration balanced delicately between possibility and illusion. There is one final layer to the dream of colonizing Mars that rarely receives quiet, careful attention. It is not about rockets. It is not about radiation. It is not even about gravity. It is about what happens to human identity when Earth is no longer home. For all of history, humanity has evolved under one sky. Every culture, every language, every philosophy, every war, every discovery, all unfolded beneath the same gravity, the same atmospheric pressure, the same blue horizon. Even when civilizations felt divided, they were physically united by the same planet. Mars breaks that unity. To colonize Mars is not simply to build habitats. It is to divide humanity across two worlds separated by tens of millions of kilometers, with communication delays that make instant connection impossible. The psychological implications of that distance are profound. When messages take minutes to travel one way, real-time dialogue vanishes. Conversations become exchanges of recordings. Emotional nuance is flattened by delay. Crisis management becomes slower. Political negotiation becomes asynchronous. Earth and Mars would not feel like neighboring cities. They would feel like distant realities. And over generations, perception shapes identity. The first settlers would remember Earth vividly. They would carry its sky in memory, its oceans in photographs, its forests in archived videos. But their children would not. Mars-born generations would inherit stories of Earth the way we inherit stories of ancient civilizations, vivid, important, but abstract. For them, the red horizon would be normal. The thin atmosphere would be normal. The sealed habitats would be normal. Earth would become a distant birthplace, not a lived experience. And when identity shifts, values shift with it. What does patriotism mean when your nation spans planets? What does citizenship mean when the laws of survival differ fundamentally between worlds? On Earth, politics operates within a naturally habitable environment. Mistakes can be catastrophic, but they rarely threaten the air you breathe directly. On Mars, policy and survival would be tightly intertwined. Energy management would be political. Oxygen allocation would be political. Expansion planning would be political. Every decision would carry existential weight. Under such conditions, governance structures may evolve differently. Perhaps Martian society would prioritize technical competence over charisma, engineers over ideologues, data over rhetoric, or perhaps scarcity would intensify factionalism, creating pressure points around resource distribution and authority. Isolation amplifies both cooperation and conflict. History offers examples of small, isolated communities. Some flourish with unity, others fracture under tension. Mars would test which tendencies dominate. There is also the matter of cultural creativity. Earth's art, music, and literature are deeply tied to landscapes. Mountains, oceans, seasons, forests, storms. Mars offers different inspiration. A static desert, global dust storms, a sky-tinted salmon during the day and blue at sunset. Phobos racing overhead in mere hours. Would Martian art romanticize Earth's oceans? Would music echo the rhythm of machinery and air circulation systems? Would literature focus on themes of isolation and endurance? Over centuries, a distinct Martian culture could emerge, shaped by survival, adaptation, and distance. And with cultural divergence comes philosophical divergence. On Earth, our myths and religions often reflect natural cycles, day and night, seasons, harvests. Mars has no true seasons like Earth's. Its year is nearly twice as long. Its sunlight is weaker. Its environment is engineered rather than organic. Philosophy born under such conditions may emphasize fragility more than abundance, control more than surrender, precision more than spontaneity. Perhaps Martians would develop a worldview centered around stewardship of artificial ecosystems. They would understand more intimately than any Earth population that life is maintained deliberately, not passively. Every breath would be a reminder that systems are sustaining them. That awareness could deepen gratitude, or it could create constant anxiety. There is also the existential dimension of living in a place where death waits outside every wall. On Earth, the environment can be dangerous, but it is rarely instantly lethal everywhere. On Mars, stepping outside without protection means near immediate loss of consciousness. That knowledge shapes behavior. Children would grow up understanding that the open horizon is not freedom, but vacuum and radiation. Risk-taking would be calibrated differently. Adventure would require calculation. Exploration would require redundancy. The romantic image of wide open frontiers does not translate cleanly to a world where exposure equals death. And yet humans adapt. We have lived in deserts, in polar regions, underwater, in orbit. Perhaps Mars would become psychologically normal, but adaptation has limits. Long-term studies of isolation environments, Antarctic stations, submarine missions, simulated Mars habitats show that mental health challenges accumulate over time. Monotony, confinement, social friction, sensory deprivation. Even if technology provides comfort and virtual environments simulate Earth's forests and oceans, the body still knows it is elsewhere. The sky would not change. The air would not carry the smell of rain. The wind would not touch skin. Colonization narratives often assume that humans can endure any environment with enough technology. But endurance is not the same as flourishing. Flourishing requires more than survival metrics. It requires emotional richness, spontaneity, unstructured space. Mars would offer structured existence, carefully regulated, carefully measured, carefully maintained. There is also the question of return. Would Martians consider Earth home? Or would Earth become a distant luxury destination? Travel between planets is not casual. Launch windows open every 26 months. Transit takes months. Costs remain enormous. Visiting Earth would not be a weekend trip. It would be a life event, and if Mars-borne bodies adapt to lower gravity, returning to Earth's gravity could be physically painful or medically complex. Over time, the possibility of easy interchange may diminish. Humanity could split not only culturally, but physically. Such divergence is unprecedented. Never before has our species lived on separate worlds long enough to evolve differently. Mars would not simply be an extension of human geography. It would be the beginning of human pluralism on a biological scale. And that carries moral weight. Are we prepared for a future where humanity is no longer singular in its lived experience, where different gravitational environments shape different bodies, where separate planetary histories shape separate mythologies? Colonization is not just a technical project. It is an evolutionary step. An evolution cannot be undone. There is also a quieter question beneath all of this. If we build a civilization on Mars, sealed, artificial, fragile, what does that say about how we treat Earth? Will Mars serve as motivation to protect our home planet more carefully? Or will it tempt some to believe that Earth is replaceable? Earth is not replaceable. Its atmosphere formed over billions of years. Its oceans regulate climate. Its magnetic field shields radiation. Its biosphere maintains chemical balance. Mars teaches us what happens when those systems fail. Its atmosphere thinned, its magnetic field faded, its surface froze. To colonize Mars successfully would require constant maintenance of systems that Earth provides freely. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson. Mars is not a second Earth waiting to be unlocked. It is a demonstration of planetary vulnerability. And if we cannot maintain the delicate systems of our own world, how will we maintain those of another? The harsh reality is not that Mars cannot be reached. It can. Not that habitats cannot be built. They can. The harsh reality is that colonization demands a level of civilizational maturity that we have not yet demonstrated over long timescales. It demands stability across generations. It demands ethical foresight about divergence. It demands humility about our limitations. Perhaps one day humanity will live on Mars, but if that day comes, it will not be an escape from Earth. It will be a reflection of what we learned here. Mars is not the solution to Earth's fragility. It is a mirror held up to it. And until we can look honestly at that reflection, at our dependence on complex systems, at our history of instability, at our tendency to romanticize expansion, the dream of colonizing Mars will remain suspended between ambition and illusion. The Red Planet is patient. It has waited billions of years. It will wait billions more. The real question is not whether we can reach it. It is whether we are ready for what reaching it truly means. When we imagine a future on Mars, we often picture technology advancing steadily, problems being solved one by one, systems becoming more efficient, more autonomous, more reliable. We assume that progress will continue in a straight line. But history does not move in straight lines. Civilizations rise, stabilize, fragment, and sometimes collapse. Technological knowledge can be lost. Infrastructure can decay. Supply chains can fail. Political systems can fracture. Earth's complexity survives because it is distributed across billions of people and countless ecosystems. Redundancy exists naturally. Mars would not have that luxury. A Martian colony would begin as a tightly integrated system of interdependence. Energy supports air production. Air supports life. Water recycling supports food growth. Food growth supports population stability. Population stability supports system maintenance. Each layer reinforces the next. But in such a system, fragility hides beneath efficiency. If energy falters, oxygen falters. If oxygen falters, everything falters. Redundancy is possible, but redundancy requires additional equipment, additional resources, additional maintenance. Every backup system adds weight, cost, and complexity. The harsh reality is that complexity itself becomes a risk. On Earth, complexity is buffered by environment. A power outage does not instantly strip oxygen from the air. A failed water pump does not remove water from rivers. On Mars, the boundary between infrastructure and survival disappears. There is also the issue of scale. For Mars to become self-sustaining, it must eventually reach industrial capacity. It must be able to produce advanced electronics, precision instruments, medical supplies, and energy systems without Earth's assistance. That means mining, refining, manufacturing, and training skilled labor locally. Mars does have resources: iron, silicon, aluminum, water ice. But extracting and processing them requires large-scale equipment and stable energy supply. Building that capacity would take decades. During those decades, dependence on Earth persists, and dependence across interplanetary distances is slow and expensive. Consider replacement parts. On Earth, if a machine fails, parts can be delivered within days. On Mars, replacement parts may take months to arrive, if they are available at all. That means Martian society would need robust local manufacturing and repair capabilities. Everything would need to be repairable. Nothing could be disposable. This shifts culture toward durability and maintenance. Products would be designed for longevity, not convenience. But maintenance demands skill. Skill demands education. Education demands stability. A disruption in any link of that chain could ripple outward. There is also the question of economic motivation. What sustains a Martian economy? Exporting physical goods from Mars to Earth would be prohibitively expensive. The gravity well may be shallower than Earth's, but the distance is immense. Perhaps data, scientific research, intellectual property. But those are intangible exports, and they require stable communication networks. If Mars cannot export significant value, it must sustain itself primarily through internal productivity. That is possible, but it means the colony must achieve a balance between population size and resource capacity. Too small, and genetic diversity suffers. Too large, and life support systems strain. Finding that equilibrium would require careful planning and continuous monitoring. And that leads to a deeper question. Who decides? On Earth, resource distribution is often contested. Markets allocate some resources, governments allocate others. On Mars, survival-critical resources cannot be left entirely to market forces. Oxygen and water are not optional commodities. Governance structures would need to integrate technical expertise with social representation. Perhaps a technocratic democracy. Perhaps a council of engineers alongside elected representatives. Whatever form it takes, governance on Mars would be tightly linked to environmental management. A political miscalculation could have immediate physical consequences that may encourage caution, or it may intensify conflict. Small communities often struggle with factionalism. Differences that might be trivial in large societies can feel amplified in confined environments. Over time, stress accumulates, and stress tests cohesion. There is also the long-term planetary perspective. Mars lacks a strong magnetic field. Its atmosphere is thin. Solar wind gradually strips atmospheric particles away. Even if humans attempt to thicken the atmosphere through terraforming, maintaining it could require continuous intervention. That means Mars might never become naturally self-sustaining. It could remain indefinitely a world dependent on engineered systems, a permanent artificial biosphere. Living in such a biosphere changes one's perception of nature. On Earth, ecosystems evolved without human design. On Mars, ecosystems would be curated, optimized, and monitored. Nature would not be wild. It would be controlled. And control requires vigilance. Over centuries, vigilance can fade. Cultural priorities shift. New generations may not remember the fragility of early systems. They may assume stability is permanent. History suggests that complacency follows success. The longer systems operate without failure, the more invisible their vulnerability becomes, until a failure occurs. There is also the psychological weight of knowing that survival depends on machines. On Earth, machines enhance life. On Mars, machines enable life. That distinction matters. When infrastructure on Earth fails, it disrupts convenience. When infrastructure on Mars fails, it threatens existence. Living under that awareness could produce resilience. It could also produce chronic anxiety. And what of exploration beyond the colony? Would Martians attempt to terraform their planet more aggressively? Would they build new habitats farther from the original settlement? Expansion introduces new risks. Every additional habitat increases surface area for failure. Every additional site requires energy, coordination, and redundancy. Perhaps Mars colonization would unfold slowly, carefully, methodically, or perhaps competition between nations, corporations, or ideological groups would accelerate expansion. Competition has driven progress on Earth, but on Mars, competition must be balanced against survival. There is also the possibility that Mars becomes symbolic rather than practical. A human presence, sustained but limited. A research hub, a demonstration of capability. Not a sprawling civilization, but a scientific outpost with generational continuity. That may be the more realistic near-term outcome. And perhaps that is enough. Colonization, in its grandest sense, implies that transforming Mars into something resembling Earth. But perhaps the wiser approach is coexistence, building small, resilient enclaves that respect the planet's limits rather than attempting to overwrite them. Mars does not need to become Earth. It can remain Mars, a place of study, adaptation, and humility. Because in the end, the harsh reality is not that Mars is unreachable, It is that Mars demands respect for limits, limits of biology, limits of engineering, limits of social cohesion, limits of time. If humanity reaches Mars, it will not be because we conquered it. It will be because we learn to live within its constraints. And that lesson, perhaps, is the most valuable one Mars has to offer. Before we dream of becoming a multi-planetary species, we must demonstrate that we can sustain complexity responsibly on Earth, because Mars will not forgive mistakes the way Earth has. Its silence is not hostile, it is indifferent, and indifference is harder to overcome than resistance. Mars does not resist colonization. It simply does not care. Whether humans thrive, that will depend entirely on our ability to maintain delicate systems over time, over generations, over centuries. That is the true measure of colonization. Not arrival, not construction, but endurance. And endurance in an environment that offers nothing freely is the most demanding challenge humanity has ever contemplated. When people speak about colonizing Mars, the conversation often ends with a sense of inevitability, as if history moves outward by default, as if every frontier eventually becomes home. But Mars is not a frontier in the traditional sense. It is not a continent separated by oceans, waiting for ships. It is not a valley across a mountain range. It is a world that evolved along a different path, a planet that lost its warmth, lost its atmosphere, lost the conditions that allow oceans to exist on the surface. Mars is not unfinished Earth. It is Earth's cautionary tale, and that may be the most important realization of all. For billions of years, Mars may have once held flowing water. Rivers carved channels into its crust. Lakes pooled in basins. Perhaps briefly, life even stirred beneath its surface. Then something changed. Its magnetic field weakened. Its atmosphere thinned. Its water either escaped into space or retreated underground. What remains today is a cold desert under a pale sky. Studying Mars tells us what planetary failure looks like. Colonizing Mars forces us to confront whether we truly understand planetary success. Earth is not merely habitable by coincidence. It is stabilized by deep, interconnected systems. Plate tectonics recycling carbon, oceans storing heat, a magnetic field shielding radiation, a thick atmosphere retaining warmth. These systems operate without human intervention. Mars would require constant human intervention. That distinction is profound. To live on Earth is to inherit stability. To live on Mars is to manufacture it. And manufacturing stability indefinitely is one of the most complex tasks imaginable. The harsh reality is not that Mars cannot support humans with enough technology. It is that Mars will never support humans effortlessly. Effortless survival is what Earth provides, and we often underestimate its value because it is familiar. Perhaps that is why Mars fascinates us. It strips away comfort. It reveals how delicate life truly is. Every breath on Mars would be a reminder that air is precious. Every sip of water would be reclaimed, recycled, purified. Every step outside would require calculation. In that sense, Mars is a teacher. It teaches discipline. It teaches humility. It teaches systems thinking. But colonization is not just about learning. It is about committing. And commitment to Mars means committing to maintain complex infrastructure across centuries. It means raising children in sealed habitats. It means designing governance structures that integrate survival with freedom. It means accepting that divergence, physical, cultural, perhaps even biological, may occur. Mars is not simply a destination. It is a fork in humanity's evolutionary path. If we choose it, we choose transformation. Not transformation in the sense of conquest, but in the sense of adaptation. Humans on Mars would adapt to lower gravity, to artificial ecosystems, to delayed communication with Earth. Over time, those adaptations might shape values and identities in ways we cannot yet predict. And that unpredictability is both inspiring and unsettling. Because once a branch of humanity grows under different conditions, it cannot simply be folded back into the original. Mars colonization, if it ever becomes permanent, would mark the first true separation of our species across planets. A species that evolved under one sun would begin to experience the cosmos directly. That is extraordinary, but it is also irreversible. There's also a quieter truth beneath the ambition. The drive to colonize Mars often arises from fear. Fear of planetary catastrophe, fear of extinction, fear that Earth may not always remain stable. Those fears are understandable, but they also raise a question. If we cannot stabilize Earth's climate, preserve its biodiversity, and manage its resources sustainably, what confidence do we have that we can manage a far more fragile artificial environment on Mars? Mars does not offer forgiveness. It does not have oceans to absorb carbon. It does not have forests to buffer temperature shifts. It does not have a thick atmosphere to shield radiation. Every system must be designed, built, maintained, and repaired. If Earth is difficult to manage, Mars will be exponentially harder. That does not mean Mars should be abandoned as a goal. It means Mars should not be seen as an escape. It is not a lifeboat. It is a laboratory, a place to test resilience, a place to refine life support systems, a place to deepen our understanding of planetary science. Perhaps the wisest path forward is gradual. Exploration first, long-duration research stations, small settlements focused on science and technology, careful evaluation of long-term physiological and psychological effects. Only after decades of accumulated knowledge would larger-scale colonization even become a rational conversation. Because colonization is not measured in rocket launches. It is measured in generational stability. Can a Martian settlement survive its third generation, its fifth, its 10th, without constant emergency intervention from Earth? Until that question can be answered with evidence rather than optimism, Mars remains an experiment. And perhaps that is enough. Mars does not need to become Earth. It can remain a symbol of curiosity, a red reminder of planetary fragility, a mirror showing us what happens when protective systems fade. If one day humans live there permanently, it will not diminish Earth's value. If anything, it will amplify it. Because no matter how advanced our technology becomes, Earth will remain the only world that sustains life without machinery. The only world where children can breathe outside without calculation. The only world where oceans regulate temperature naturally. Mars challenges us not to abandon Earth, but to appreciate it. The harsh reality of colonizing Mars is not just technical, it is philosophical. It forces us to ask why we expand. Is it to survive, to explore, to understand, or to escape? If we go to Mars with the mindset of escape, we may carry our problems with us. If we go with the mindset of stewardship and learning, Mars could deepen our maturity as a species. The red planet is patient. It does not promise salvation. It offers silence. Whether that silence becomes the backdrop of a thriving human civilization or remains the quiet of an untouched desert depends not on rockets alone, but on wisdom. Colonizing Mars is not impossible in the narrow sense, but it is far more demanding than the dream suggests. It demands technological mastery. It demands social cohesion. It demands generational continuity. It demands humility about planetary systems. Until we meet those demands here, on the only world that sustains us naturally, Mars will remain a distant ambition, powerful, inspiring, but constrained by the harsh realities of physics, biology, and time. And perhaps the final lesson is this: if we truly wish to become a multiplanetary species, the first planet we must learn to protect is the one we already have. When people imagine the future of humanity, they often picture expansion, cities rising on distant worlds, rockets lifting off in steady rhythm, generations born under alien skies calling other planets home. Mars, in these visions, becomes inevitable, a stepping stone toward the stars, a proving ground, a symbol of destiny. But destiny is a story we tell ourselves. Physics tells a different story. Mars does not welcome us. It does not resist us either. It simply exists, cold, thin, quiet, and indifferent. And indifference is the most difficult environment to conquer. By now, we understand the obvious obstacles: radiation, low gravity, toxic soil, dust storms, fragile life support systems. We understand the engineering challenges, the biological unknowns, the psychological pressures. But in the end, colonizing Mars comes down to something deeper than technology. It comes down to sustainability. Not in the environmental slogan sense, in the literal sense. Can a complex human society sustain itself, unaided, on a world that offers nothing freely? Every civilization on Earth, no matter how advanced, still depends on ecosystems that evolved without human design. We depend on the carbon cycle, the water cycle, microbial activity in soil, oceanic circulation, atmospheric chemistry. Even our most sophisticated cities rest on top of a natural planetary foundation. Mars offers no such foundation. If we colonize it, we must become the foundation. We must manufacture air. We must manage water. We must simulate ecological cycles. We must maintain power continuously. And we must do this not for years, but for centuries. A Martian colony would not be a frontier town. It would be a planetary scale machine. And machines fail. They degrade. They require maintenance. The more complex the machine, the more points of failure exist. The more generations pass, the more knowledge must be transferred perfectly. Knowledge gaps cannot exist when the margin for error is zero. On Earth, mistakes can be absorbed by the environment. On Mars, mistakes accumulate. There is also the matter of meaning. Why build a civilization that lives permanently inside walls? Why raise children in habitats where the sky cannot be touched? Why choose a world where stepping outside without protection means death? Perhaps the answer lies in exploration, in the human drive to push boundaries. But exploration and colonization are not the same. Exploration is temporary. Colonization is permanent. Exploration seeks knowledge. Colonization seeks permanence. Mars may be perfect for exploration. It may be ideal for research bases, scientific experiments, and technological testing. But permanence demands a different level of certainty. It demands confidence that we can preserve life under artificial conditions indefinitely. An indefinite time is something humanity has never truly tested. Our modern technological civilization is young. Industrial society spans only a few centuries. Spaceflight, only decades. We have not yet demonstrated that we can sustain high technology systems across millennia without collapse or radical transformation. Mars would demand that proof. There is also a humbling possibility. What if the true value of Mars is not that we colonize it, but that we learn from it? Mars shows us what happens when a planet loses its protective systems. Its magnetic field weakened. Its atmosphere escaped. Its surface froze. It stands as a silent record of planetary change. Studying Mars deepens our understanding of climate, atmospheric physics, and long-term planetary evolution. Those lessons are far more urgent for Earth than for Mars, because Earth is still alive. Earth still breathes. Earth still supports forests, oceans, coral reefs, and millions of species. If we cannot protect that complexity, the only naturally functioning biosphere we know, what does it mean to attempt building one artificially on another world? Mars may inspire us to innovate, but it also challenges us to reflect. Perhaps on another world? Mars may inspire us to innovate, but it also challenges us to reflect. Perhaps the ultimate harsh reality is this: Mars does not need us, and we do not need Mars, not for survival today. We need wisdom. We need resilience. We need to demonstrate that we can manage complexity responsibly. If one day humanity becomes capable of sustaining stable, ethical, long-term settlements on Mars, it will be because we first learned to sustain our own planet properly. Mars will not rescue us from our mistakes. It will magnify them. If we carry instability, division, and short-term thinking to Mars, those traits will become even more dangerous in an environment with no safety net. But if we carry cooperation, discipline, and long-term vision, Mars could become something extraordinary, not a replacement Earth, but a testament to human maturity. A place where survival depends on collaboration, a world that demands precision, a society that understands fragility intimately. Perhaps that is the future Mars offers. Not escape, but evolution in perspective. Colonizing Mars is not about conquering a planet. It is about confronting our limitations. It forces us to ask whether expansion is wisdom or impulse, whether ambition is grounded in responsibility, whether we seek growth for survival or for pride. The red planet will remain long after our debates fade. It has waited billions of years. It will wait billions more. Whether humans walk its surface permanently or only as visitors does not change its patience. What changes is us. If we choose to pursue Mars seriously, we will need to become a species capable of thinking in centuries, of planning beyond individual lifetimes, of prioritizing stability over spectacle. That transformation may be the true challenge, and perhaps the true gift. Because in wrestling with the question of Mars, we learn something essential about Earth. We learn how rare breathable air truly is, how extraordinary oceans are, how precious a thick atmosphere and magnetic field can be. Mars strips away illusion. It shows us what happens when planetary systems fail, and in doing so, it quietly reminds us of what we already possess. The harsh reality of colonizing Mars is not simply that it is difficult. It is that it demands more from us than we have yet proven we can consistently give. It demands patience, unity, discipline, and a deep respect for planetary systems. Until we embody those qualities fully, Mars will remain a dream balanced on the edge of possibility. Not impossible, but not inevitable. And perhaps that is the honest conclusion. Mars is within reach. But whether it becomes home depends less on rockets and more on who we choose to become.